Right now, there's about $50 trillion of credit just moving through the United States economy. But like, if you look at the total amount of actual cash, physical money, it is only about $3 trillion.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild discrepancy when you actually look at the numbers.
Right. It's crazy. That means that almost everything you interact with, almost everything you think of as, money in your daily life is actually kind of an illusion. It's just a promise.
Exactly. It is a massive, totally invisible web of IOUs. And understanding that specific dynamic is, well, it's basically the key to understanding every economic headline you see today.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Our mission
Mhm.
today is to decode a topic that usually makes people want to immediately change the channel, which is the global economy.
Yeah, people hear economy and they just completely glaze over.
Oh, absolutely, because most of the time, the economy is presented to us like it's the weather, right? It's this
Mhm.
unpredictable, chaotic storm of jargon. Inflation, rate hikes, supply chains.
No.
It just randomly rains on your parade or, I don't know, unexpectedly boosts your retirement account.
Right.
But what if it isn't weather at all? What if it's really just a simple machine?
Well, to figure that out, we are looking at a highly influential source today. It's a transcript called How the Economic Machine Works by the legendary investor Ray Dalio.
Yeah.
And the beauty of this material is that it completely strips away all those academic theories and, the dense financial textbook jargon.
Thank goodness.
Right. It offers a really practical template. And this is the template that he actually used to anticipate the 2008 global financial crisis, while, I mean, most of the world was caught completely off guard.
I mean, reading through this, I honestly found it incredibly empowering because once you see the gears of this machine, you really cannot unsee them. And the author argues that these gears are driven by nothing more than, well, basic human nature.
Yeah, you definitely don't need a PhD to understand it. You just need to understand how human beings behave when you uh, offer them something they want.
Right.
We can trace literally every global crash and every booming decade back to a single microscopic action. Like before we can even analyze those massive $50 trillion credit cycles, we have to isolate the smallest gear in the machine, which is the transaction.
Okay, let's unpack that because an economy isn't some, abstract cloud. It is literally just a zillion transactions repeated over and over again.
Exactly. And a transaction is beautifully simple. A buyer gives money or credit to a seller, and in exchange, they get a good, a service, or a financial asset. That's it.
Just a simple swap.
Yeah. And if you ever want to know the price of something, you don't need complicated math formulas. You just take the total amount of spending, divide it by the total quantity sold, and boom, you have the price.
So if spending goes up, but the quantity of, say, apples stays the exact same, the price of an apple just mathematically has to go up.
Right. That math is totally immutable. And while millions of individuals and businesses and banks are making these transactions every single second, the biggest players in the machine are the central government and the central bank.
Okay, so the central government, they collect taxes and spend money on public goods, right?
Yep. And the central bank is unique because it controls the flow of credit. They do that by setting interest rates, and they have the exclusive ability to actually print new money.
Which brings us right back to that staggering statistic from the beginning. 50 trillion in credit versus only 3 trillion in actual money. The most important, volatile, and honestly misunderstood part of the entire economic machine is credit.
For sure. I mean, most people use the words money and credit interchangeably, but mechanically they behave very, very differently.
The source uses a really brilliant analogy here involving a bar tab to make this concrete.
Oh, yeah, the bar tab analogy is great. So if you walk into a bar and buy a beer with cash, the transaction is settled immediately.
Right.
The exchange is totally complete.
But if I ask the bartender to put that beer on my tab, I haven't actually paid for anything yet. I've just, promised to pay in the future.
So wait, when you open a bar tab, you're literally creating credit out of thin air. Does that mean the vast majority of our global economy is essentially just a massive, invisible web of IOUs?
It absolutely does. What's fascinating here is the creation of that credit immediately establishes a dual reality.
What do you mean by a dual reality?
Well, that newly minted credit becomes an asset to the bartender. It's a valuable thing they now own on their balance sheet. But to you, the borrower, it becomes a liability. You owe something.
Oh, right.
And here's the crucial part. That transaction is not truly settled until you eventually come back and pay the tab with real money. Until that happens, the entire exchange is just floating on trust.
Wow. And because credit makes up the vast majority of our economy, it's basically the primary engine for growth. I mean, if banks didn't lend money, businesses couldn't build factories and people couldn't buy homes.
But we have to make a hard distinction here between the types of debt we take on, because the source heavily emphasizes the difference between good debt and bad debt.
Yeah, and we see this play out constantly. Imagine borrowing $50,000 to buy a luxury speedboat.
Sounds fun, but probably not a great financial move.
Right. That is a textbook example of bad debt. The speedboat generates zero income to help you pay back the loan, but you still owe the $50,000 plus all that interest. You have increased your liabilities without increasing your ability to produce.
Compare that to, say, a baker who borrows $50,000 to buy an industrial-grade oven for their bakery.
Perfect example.
That oven allows them to bake like 5 times as many loaves of bread a day. So the debt literally generates the new income required to pay itself off, while also improving the baker's overall standard of living. I mean, that is the definition of good debt.
Spot on. And the way we use that credit, whether it's for speedboats or industrial ovens, is what physically creates the cyclical booms and busts we all feel in our daily lives.
Right, the cycle.
Yeah. The source outlines 3 main forces driving the global economy. First, there is productivity growth. This is the slow, steady upward line over time as humanity invents new technologies and, just simply gets better at doing things.
Makes sense.
Second is the short-term debt cycle, which typically lasts about 5 to 8 years. And third is the long-term debt cycle, which spans a massive 75 to 100 years.
Okay, let's focus on that 5 to 8 year short-term cycle first, because the mechanics here rely on one absolutely vital rule of the machine, and that rule is one person's spending is another person's income.
That rule is the beating heart of the economy. Literally, if you understand that, you understand exactly why booms and recessions happen.
Okay, so let's trace a single dollar to see why. Let's say you earn $100,000 a year and you have zero debt. You look like a really great bet to a bank, so they lend you $10,000.
Yep, pretty standard.
You now have $110,000 to spend. And you decide to hire a contractor to renovate your kitchen for that 10 grand. Well, your spending just became the contractor's income. They just earned an extra $10,000.
And because the contractor's income just went up, the bank looks at them and says, hey, you are making more money. You are more creditworthy. So the bank lends the contractor even more money.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. The contractor takes their new income plus their new loan and goes out to buy a new truck. The truck dealership earns that money, their income goes up, their creditworthiness goes up, and the whole cycle just accelerates exponentially.
So this is the expansion phase.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone feels great. But eventually, all this spending fueled by credit, it starts growing faster than the actual production of goods, right? Like if everyone is borrowing money to buy lumber, but the forests aren't growing any faster, the price of lumber just shoots up, we get inflation.
Exactly, and the central bank is monitoring that inflation constantly. When prices rise too fast, it threatens the stability of the entire machine. So, to cool things down, the central bank hits the brakes by raising interest rates.
And suddenly, borrowing that $10,000 is way more expensive.
Right. People stop taking out loans. Furthermore, the variable interest rates on their existing credit cards or their mortgages go up. They're forced to dedicate way more of their monthly paycheck to paying down old debts, which means they have less money to spend at, say, restaurants or hardware stores.
And because your spending is someone else's income, when you stop spending at the hardware store, the store owner's income drops.
Yeah.
The store owner then can't afford to borrow, and the cycle basically runs in reverse.
Exactly. Prices stop rising or they even fall, which is deflation, and the economy enters a recession.
Yikes.
The pain builds until the central bank finally decides things have cooled off enough, and then they lower interest rates to make borrowing cheap again, and a brand new 5 to 8 year cycle begins.
Okay, wait. Here's where it gets really interesting to me. I want to pause here and challenge the fundamental logic of this whole system.
Sure, go for it.
Because if the only way we get these massive economic booms is by borrowing money, then borrowing is really just a mechanism for pulling spending forward from your future self.
Oh, that is an incredibly precise way to look at it.
Right. I mean, if I buy a car today with a loan, I am mathematically guaranteeing that at some point in the future, I will have to spend less than I make in order to pay it back. So every single economic boom we celebrate, fueled by credit, is essentially guaranteeing a future bust. It's not a political flaw or a policy failure. It is just the mechanical physics of borrowing.
The math absolutely demands it. Productivity is the only thing that actually matters in the long run. If you want to consume more, you eventually have to produce more, period.
Yeah.
But credit allows us to bypass that reality in the short term. You just cannot pull spending forward indefinitely without eventually having to balance the ledger.
Okay, so if the central bank can just manage these 5 to 8 year swings by twisting the dial on interest rates up and down, why do we ever experience those terrifying, world-altering economic crashes? Like, why does the system occasionally seem to just completely implode?
Well, that brings us to the long-term debt cycle, and this is where the raw reality of human nature really takes over. The source notes that this 75 to 100-year cycle happens because humans have a deep-seated, basically psychological inclination to push things to the limit.
Human nature strikes again.
Exactly. At the end of every short-term cycle, instead of using the good times to pay down their debts, people consistently choose to borrow and spend even more.
Because we suffer from massive recency bias. If the stock market went up last year, we just automatically assume it will go up this year. We really can't help ourselves.
Human optimism can be super dangerous in an economic machine. Over decades, through multiple short-term cycles, the overall total debt in the system keeps rising faster than the overall incomes. This creates a growing debt burden, which is simply the ratio of a society's total debt to its total income.
This psychological trap creates the bubble.
Yeah.
When I was reading this part, the best mental image I had was someone who is constantly transferring massive credit card balances to brand new cards with higher limits.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, like they're technically drowning in debt, but they feel incredibly wealthy because they haven't actually been forced to pay the principal yet. They are just making minimum payments with other borrowed money. So what does this all mean for the whole system?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, all that borrowed money is being pumped into assets. People borrow heavily to buy real estate, driving home prices to just astronomical levels. They borrow to buy stocks, inflating the market.
Wow, yeah.
Everyone feels rich on paper because their assets are soaring in value, which makes them feel perfectly comfortable taking on even more debt.
But the delusion cannot last. What happens when the math finally catches up?
It means the bubble bursts. At a certain point, the debt repayments start growing faster than incomes. It is an unavoidable mathematical wall.
Ouch.
And when it hits, people are forced to cut back on spending to service their massive debts. As spending drops, incomes fall. As incomes fall, people lose their creditworthiness. Borrowing grinds to a complete halt. We reach the peak of the long-term debt cycle.
Just a complete standstill.
Exactly. This mechanical sequence is exactly what triggered the Great Depression in 1929, the Japanese crash in 1989, and the U.S. housing crisis in 2008.
Okay, which means we really need to talk about the terrifying difference between a standard recession and a deleveraging, because they're absolutely not the same thing.
No, not at all. The distinction is quite literally a matter of systemic survival. In a normal recession, the downward spiral of less spending and less income can be fixed pretty easily. The central bank just lowers interest rates, making credit cheap again, and the engine restarts.
But in a deleveraging, the vicious cycle takes on a life of its own. Borrowers are squeezed so tightly by their debt burdens that they can't just, cut back on buying lattes. They are forced to sell off their core assets just to make their loan payments.
Exactly. And suddenly, millions of people are trying to sell their houses or liquidate their stock portfolios at the exact same time. This just floods the market with supply, which completely crashes the stock market and causes real estate values to plummet.
And when asset values tank, the collateral backing the bank loans vanishes. Suddenly, the banks are in huge trouble. And here is why the standard fix doesn't work. In a deleveraging, interest rates have already been slashed to 0%.
Right. They hit zero in the 1930s, and they hit zero again in 2008.
So the central bank's main brake and gas pedal is completely broken.
Exactly. You cannot lower interest rates below zero to stimulate borrowing. The problem isn't that borrowing is too expensive. The problem is that the entire economy is completely crushed by the sheer weight of the existing debt. Lenders look at the landscape and realize these massive debts can never be fully paid back. The entire economy is essentially stripped of its creditworthiness.
Okay, wait. If you are an average listener, this is the moment where absolute panic sets in. If the central bank's only tool is broken because rates hit zero and borrowers are completely paralyzed, how does the machine not just explode permanently? What do you even do?
Well, the system has to find a way to bring that massive debt burden down. Historically, the source outlines 4 distinct levers that policymakers are forced to pull during every major deleveraging. Lever number one is cutting spending, which is usually referred to as austerity. People, businesses, and governments all tighten their belts and try to pay down their debts.
But the source points out a brutal irony here. Austerity actually makes the debt burden worse initially, right?
It does.
If we go back to the golden rule, one person's spending is another's income. When the government and the public simultaneously stop spending money, incomes plummet across the board. Incomes actually fall faster than the debts are paid down. So the debt-to-income ratio goes up. It just causes severe deflation and mass unemployment.
Spot on. And because austerity fails to fix the ratio and causes immense political pain, policymakers are forced to pull lever number two, debt reduction. This means defaults and restructuring. Lenders realize that, hey, receiving 50 cents on the dollar is better than receiving nothing at all, so they agree to rewrite the contracts. They might lower the total amount owed or extend the repayment period.
But wait, this mechanism destroys wealth instantly. Remember the bartender's asset from earlier. When you open that bar tab, your debt became their asset.
Yep.
If you default or restructure your debt so you only pay half, the bartender's asset just vanishes into thin air. Their balance sheet is destroyed. They are instantly poorer. When this happens on a national scale with banks and mortgages, trillions of dollars of perceived wealth are simply erased, plunging the economy into a deep depression.
It's brutal. And the pain of that depression pushes governments toward lever number three, wealth redistribution. Because incomes have collapsed, the government is collecting far less in taxes. But simultaneously, they need to spend massively on unemployment benefits and social programs just to keep people afloat.
Right.
To fund this, they raise taxes heavily on the wealthy, attempting to redistribute money from the haves to the have-nots.
We can all guess how well that goes over.
Yeah.
The poor, who are suffering terribly, resent the wealthy. The wealthy, who are watching their assets evaporate and their taxes skyrocket, totally resent the poor.
The social tension becomes explosive. The source is very clear on the historical stakes here. If wealth redistribution and economic depression go on long enough, it frequently leads to extreme political shifts. It was this exact economic dynamic in the 1930s that created the desperation necessary for Adolf Hitler to rise to power in Germany, leading to catastrophic war.
Wow. So the physical reality of these three levers, austerity, debt destruction, and taxing the wealthy, is that they are all incredibly deflationary and cause immense human suffering. So how do we survive a deleveraging without just tearing society apart?
Well, policymakers have to balance out that deflationary pain by pulling the fourth lever. They have to print money.
Printing money.
Yep, printing money is the only lever that is inherently inflationary and stimulative. When credit disappears from the system, people are completely desperate for cash. And the central bank is the only entity with the power to create new money digitally out of thin air. They do this and use the new money to buy financial assets and government bonds. In 2008, the Federal Reserve printed over $2 trillion to flood the system with liquidity.
But there's a massive catch to how this mechanism works. The central bank can print money, but they are only legally allowed to buy financial assets like bonds. They cannot just, mail a check to an unemployed factory worker. If they want to get money into the hands of everyday citizens, they have to partner with the central government.
The mechanics of this partnership are critical. The central bank uses its newly printed money to buy government bonds. In plain terms, they are essentially lending this new digital cash to the government. The government, which does have the authority to hand out money, takes that cash and runs a massive deficit, spending it on stimulus checks, infrastructure projects, and unemployment programs.
So that physically injects money back into the real economy.
Exactly. And this leads to the ultimate goal of the entire process, the beautiful deleveraging.
A beautiful deleveraging. Sounds nice.
It is. This happens when policymakers perfectly balance the painful deflationary levers of debt restructuring with the inflationary lever of printing money. If they get the balance right, debts decline relative to income, real economic growth slowly returns, and social stability is completely maintained.
But threading that needle requires strict adherence to a specific mathematical rule, right? Income must grow faster than the interest rate on the debt.
Yes.
Let's break that math down so it is crystal clear for everyone listening. Imagine a country has a debt-to-income ratio of 100%. They owe exactly as much as they make in a given year. If the interest rate on that massive pile of debt is 2%, the debt is automatically growing by 2% every single year, just from interest.
Right.
So if the country's income is only growing by 1%, they are mathematically doomed. They will never, ever catch up. The debt will constantly outpace their ability to pay it.
Exactly. The government is forced to print enough money to stimulate the economy to ensure the rate of income growth pushes above that 2% interest rate.
Okay, but doesn't printing trillions of dollars out of thin air just guarantee hyperinflation? You always think of people pushing wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a single loaf of bread.
It's a valid fear, but the source provides a fantastic counterintuitive insight here that explains why that doesn't always happen. It won't cause massive inflation as long as the printed money is simply offsetting the vanishing credit.
Oh, because of the total spending rule.
Exactly. Think back to the formula for price. Total spending divided by total quantity. Total spending includes both money and credit. A dollar of spending paid for with cash has the exact same effect on a price tag as a dollar of spending paid for with a credit card.
So if a massive deleveraging wipes out trillions of dollars of credit, total spending just plummets. The central bank is really just creating cash to fill the massive hole left by the destroyed credit. They're just trying to keep the total spending level steady.
You nailed it. The danger is only when policymakers get addicted to the printing press. If they print far more money than is needed to offset the lost credit, well, then spending outpaces production and you get unacceptably high inflation. That is exactly what happened in Germany during their botched deleveraging in the 1920s. It requires incredible discipline.
It is a super delicate balancing act.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, looking at the economy through this mechanical lens demystifies so much of what we see on the news. It stops feeling like a conspiracy or just pure chaos and starts looking like a predictable series of levers. But how does this actually apply to the listener? Because the author distills this entire economic machine into 3 golden rules of thumb for both policymakers and everyday people to use.
Right. So rule number 1, don't have debt rise faster than income, because no matter how long the expansion lasts, eventually those debt burdens will crush you.
And rule number 2, don't have income rise faster than productivity. Because if you're getting paid more, but not actually producing more value, you will eventually become completely uncompetitive on a global scale.
And rule number 3, do all you can to raise your productivity. Because when you zoom out past the 5-year credit swings and the 100-year debt bubbles, productivity is the single most important factor in raising your standard of living over time.
Armed with this framework, the next time you see headlines screaming about interest rates or stock market panic, you really don't have to feel overwhelmed. You can look at the data and see the simple mechanical gears of human nature and credit turning in the background. You can literally ask yourself, where are we in the cycle?
Having that context really changes everything. You stop reacting to the daily symptoms and start anticipating the actual structural shifts.
Speaking of anticipating shifts, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. The source points out that the long-term debt cycle takes about 75 to 100 years to fully play out. Our last massive global deleveraging reset was in 2008. So where do you think we sit in the cycle right now? Furthermore, with modern technology, digital finance, and algorithmic lending making it easier and faster than ever to borrow money with just a click on your phone, are we pulling our future spending forward faster than any generation in human history?
That is a fascinating question, and frankly, one that will absolutely define the next chapter of the machine.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, and we will catch you next time.